Hello everyone, this is a second and the final part of tutorial videos about throwing a knife. Let's get started. First, let's open a Cascadeur, or if you didn't close it, navigate to your project and create a new sample with Unreal Engine 5 Mannequin Many. If you are still in your old project, to see this window, click on the home button on the top left side of the screen. Let's add a reference video here. Here it is. Let's move it and scale it. So select 0 frame and let's add 0 pose. Move left leg, right leg, right arm somewhere here, left arm somewhere here, pelvis a little bit to the bottom, and it should be moved a little bit further, and this leg also a little bit further, like this. Also, shoulders should be rotated a little bit more, like this. Ankle is visible a little bit, so let's move a right hand somewhere here. Well, that's enough for a first frame, I think. Maybe we should move the pelvis a little bit lower. No. Okay, that's fine. Let's find a next keyframe. Oh, this one, 15. So here, right arm. And the left arm going straight, almost straight. So let's move it. Left leg somewhere here. Head should look in the direction of a knife. And the ankle should not be straight. We should have some angle like this. So let's watch on legs. Shift A, Shift D. Okay, pelvis also moved a little bit. Now I have to change manually how my leg is located, aligned. I'm gonna rotate it like okay, I have to select this bottom point and move it a little. Well, I can't. Okay, we have to move it a little bit upward. Well, what's the problem? Okay, let it be like this. Then, well, for this part, oh, the problem is that I wasn't on a keyframe. So let me select them again. And now I can rotate my leg like this. Okay, translation of a pelvis should be bigger. I'm changing between rotation and translation with W and E keyboard button. Also, after I have translated the pelvis, I should translate my arm that is throwing a knife also. So Shift A, Shift D to switch between keyframes. Move it a little bit up. Okay, and a last frame. Here, 27. Pelvis goes down, so we're almost standing on our knee. And our arm goes bottom and closer to a body. And also a left arm goes a little bit here. Well, that's all. Let's try to interpolate between these keyframes and check how it looks like. Well, let's add more rotation, like in this animation here, somewhere in the middle. Let's copy 0 animation for all autopause nodes and paste them on 6th frame. And here I'm gonna, as we can see, it rotates a little bit more, not very realistic. I don't think that the person can even rotate like this, but let's also add a little bit more of rotation. Well, I think that's fine. We will see it in Unreal when it will be scaled on speed. So let's export this animation file, export without meshes. And I'm gonna call it V5 throwing knife 2 FBX. Now let's open an Unreal. I have already added one animation here. So now let's find this animation. And import it. Select skeleton as many. Import. Well, now let's open it. And in our animation, our character is rotated to the right. So we have to rotate it back. Select a root bone, rotate it on 90 degrees and click on key button. Do the same for knife 1. Save all. Well, now we have to play these montages. So let's create a new folder somewhere and call it throwing knife. Let's move these animations into this folder. Here we're gonna create a new folder and call it montages. Select both of these animations, create any montage. Move them into montages folder. Open it up. Okay, here is our first montage. Let's open asset details and set its rate scale from 1 to 1.5. Save it. Open second animation montage. And its rate scale from 1 to 1.5 also. And close it. Now open our character. Open a place where an input allocated. And let's add one more input and call it debug. Let's make it debug key R. You can add what input you want. I'm just using debug key for now. So on pressed, we're gonna play our montage. So let's do it. Let's get our mesh and call play montage on pressed. And how we're gonna do this? We're gonna play first montage, and if player is fast enough to click this button again, then it's gonna play second montage. Well, now let's add a new variable and call it I'm calling it just debug underscore. You can call it without debug and call it is throwing knife. By default, it is false. One more variable is knife animation index of type integer. And by default, it is 0. So let's add one more variable and call it throw knife montages of type anim montage object reference and make it an array. Compile, and now with throw knife montages selected, we have default values. Let's add two values. First one is gonna be throw knife 1 montage and throw knife 2 as the second value of this array. Well, now here in play montage function we're gonna get this throw knife montages and get a copy. we have to provide an index. Index is gonna be our knife animation index. Plug this get into montage to play. Compile and save. Now, on blend out, alright, before calling this function, we also have to add a branch with holding B keyboard button and left clicking somewhere in an empty space, add a branch. And plug is throwing a knife. And we're gonna play montage only if is throwing a knife is false. Now, when a montage started to blend out, we're gonna set is throwing a knife to false. And we're gonna get our knife animation index, check if it is equal to throw knife montages lengths, not lengths, last index. So if a current playing montage is equal to last index of an array of montages, then we are selecting an integer by this boolean and setting a knife animation index. So if true, then we're setting 0. If false, then we're setting debug knife animation index plus 1. So that our combo will be like first montage, second montage, then first montage again if we have 2 animations. If we have 3, then it will be first, second, third, then first again. Okay. Now let's test it. Well, my debug is throwing knife is always false because I'm not setting it to true anytime. So let's set is throwing knife to true as soon as this function of playing montage has been called. So here, not uncompleted on the top execution node, plug set throwing knife to true. Compile, save, and let's play. So here is our combo of 2 throwing animations. Now we have to throw something. Let's navigate to throwing knife folder, create new blueprint class, actor, and call it BP throwing knife. Open it, add static mesh. Compile, save, and one good question is where do we have to get a knife? Maybe Megascans will help us. Okay, I've searched for dagger on Megascans and we can download some of daggers here. Here is some daggers that looks like a throwing dagger. I'm gonna download it. So I've just signed in with my Epic Games account and let's download this dagger and add it to our project. And add it one more time so that it will navigate me to a folder where it has added it. I'm gonna rename it to S throwing knife test. Well, select static mesh of your throwing knife actor and add a static mesh to your static mesh component here. Here is our throwing dagger. Well, now this dagger should appear in hand of our player at some time. So let's navigate to our montages and here let's create a new blueprint class anim montage anim notify state. Select it and call it anim montage notify amn dagger in hand. Like this. For example, open it and override function. I don't know why it's opened like this. Let's override a function in functions and select receive notify begin. It will create as a function. Here we're gonna get a mesh component, get an owner of this component, cast it to BP your character, or it will be much better if your character implements some interface and you will tell your character using an interface what to do. And we're gonna call some function in our player. Let's open our player, our character I mean, and create some function or event. Let's create an event below our debug key r. Custom event and call it attach throwing knife. Yes, attach throwing knife. Compile save. Let's open anim notify back. Here we're gonna get our character after a cast and call attach throwing knife and plug execution node to return node with return value true. Duplicate it, duplicate this return node, and if cast failed, return with false. Compile, save. Now for a throwing knife, for our character, we have to attach this dagger to somewhere to our skeleton. Let's select mesh in the components here and open our skeletal mesh. On the right side in details panel, open skeletal mesh asset. Here it is. Well, now we have to decide in which hand where this dagger should appear. In my case, it should appear in the right hand. So I'm gonna select hand R. First I have to find it in a bones hierarchy in the skeleton tree. Here is hand R. Let's add a socket here. Right click on hand R bone, add socket. Hand R socket is added. Click F2 keyboard button to rename it. Let's call it throwing knife socket. Ctrl A, Ctrl C to copy this name. Right click on this socket, add preview asset, and type throwing knife. So here is our throwing knife. There's a lot of things that we have to do. We have to locate where this knife should be located. So we are changing a socket location to which this knife will be attached. Something like this, for example. That's fine. Save. We can even remove. Right click on this socket and remove all attached assets so that we will not see this knife anymore. Now open your character and your event attach throwing knife. Here we're gonna spawn actor from class. Select a class. It's gonna be our dagger. BP throwing. I don't know why I'm calling this dagger. BP throwing knife. It will not compile because we have to provide the transform. Split this transform so that it will be 0, 0, 0. Next, we're gonna get our skeletal mesh of our character. Let's move it all a little bit down. And from a mesh, call attach actor to component. Mesh should be connected to a parent node, and spawned actor return value should be connected to a target. Socket name is gonna be a socket name that we have just created and copied. Throwing knife socket. Location rule is gonna be snap to target. Compile, save. So now this event will work. Let's open our montages now and use this AMN dagger in hand. Let's open throwing knife 1 montage and select an animation place, animation frame when a dagger should be attached. Here it is on 9th frame. On notified section you will have one, right click on a place, add notified state and search for a, not this one, ANM, well, where is it? AMN, dagger in hand, and add it here. Do the same for a second montage. Each should be added to a hand somewhere here, I think. Right click, add notify state, AMN dagger in hand, save it. Now, when we will play an animation, at a particular frame of an animation, dagger will be attached to a hand. Here it is. But it's not removed. It's not thrown yet. We are only attaching it. Let's open our character and add a new event. Call it, right click on an empty space, custom event, and call it throw touched knife. To throw a touched knife, we have to know about a touched knife, so in the previous event we have to promote this spawned actor to a variable. So let's get return value and promote a variable, call it touched throwing knife. I'm calling this everything here debug because in future it's gonna be part of my weapon system and it will not be located in my character. Well, now we have to define how our knife will fly. Let's open our throwing knife. Click add and add projectile movement. Select projectile movement and by default we should not have a projectile movement, so we have to initial speed, max speed, where is it? Let me check. So it's somewhere, it starts to fly, but where is gravity? To 0, will it move? Okay. Honestly, I thought that by default initial speed and max speed of projectile movement are not 0. Maybe that's some feature of new Unreal, or I'm missing something. So, first thing that we have to do is we have to no, rotation follows velocity. We should check this. Save and compile. Set initial speed and max speed to 0. Next thing that we have to do, we have to open an event graph and create a custom event. Call it start movement. Here we're gonna get a projectile movement and set initial speed to something like maybe 1000. I'm not sure. Well, after selecting projectile movement, you can see in which coordinates velocity will be added. It will be added only on x-axis. So for now, that's fine. We will change it later. Let's open our thief character. And on throw attached knife, we're gonna get this knife that we have promoted. We get our mesh. And first we have to detach our throwing knife. So we don't need to get mesh. We have to get our throwing knife and call detach actor from actor. Detach actor from actor. Location rule. Keep world. And right after that, our throwing knife is detached. Now let's open our knife actor and create a custom event here. Call it something like start movement. Compile, save, and we have to know about a direction of a throwing. So it should have an input direction of type vector. Here we are getting our projectile movement and calling set velocity. And velocity is gonna be direction multiplied by some float. Right click on this vector and select float single precision. This float is gonna be a flying speed of a knife. Let it be for 3000, for example. Compile and save. Now let's navigate to a folder with our montages and create new blueprint class. I name montage notify state. Select and call it amen throw dagger. Let's open it up. Override a function. Received notify begin. Here we're gonna do the same as in the previous notify state. Get mesh, get owner. Cast it to BP thief character. We're getting this character and calling throw attached knife event. Connect to return node with true, duplicate return node with Ctrl D, and return with false if cast failed. So we are always returning from this function. Compile, save. Now let's open our montages and select a place where our knife will be thrown. Here, for example, add notify state, amen throw dagger. Save it. Next, throw knife 2. Here somewhere, amen throw dagger. Save, and let's test it. And nothing happens because we're not calling this event anywhere. Let's open our character. I have closed it. And after detaching our knife from an actor, let's get it again and call start movement. And we have to provide a direction in which our knife will fly. We're gonna get our actor rotation. Get actor rotation. And get forward vector. And this is gonna be our direction. Compile, save. Let's test it. So now our knife is flying, but you can see that its rotation is incorrect. Well, we can fix it now. Let's open our throwing knife, open our viewport, and I'm not sure. Let's rotate it on 90 degrees by X. Too much speed, I cannot understand, to be honest. Let's make it 500. No, we have to rotate it by Y. So it's gonna be like this. Am I correct? Yes. Okay, but it will break our socket. So let's open our skeletal mesh menu, select our socket, and we also have to rotate it um, back on -90 on y-axis, I think. To check it, let's open throw knife 1 and set its rate scale, or let's open our character and on play montage, set play rate from 1 to 0.2. Let's test it. Not -90, but 90, like this. Oh, well, I think that I have broken something. Nothing is changed. Well, let's add preview socket, throwing knife, add preview socket, throwing knife, rotate it back. So let's fix it in another way. Let's fix a mesh by itself. So let's open our throwing knife and reset its rotation to 0, 0, 0. Navigate where static mesh is located. Here it is. Move it somewhere on our scene. Open modeling tool. And on X form, let's rotate it on 90 degrees on Y-axis. And let's bake a transform. We're gonna bake a rotation, accept. Now it is rotated on 90 degrees. So we have just rotated a mesh by itself and not in an actor. Well, and now we have to change the socket again because mesh has been changed. File, save. It doesn't work. Why? In throwing knife we have correct. Oh. No, I still don't understand why it happens, to be honest. We're playing a montage. And we have to touch. Let's save all. Well, even in animation montage, everything is fine. So the problem is somewhere in an actor. Well, let's check. We're spawning where we are spawning in Nectar. Attaching it to a component at the correct socket. Well, what if... Okay, I think that I understood what is the problem, and the problem is that in our projectile movement we have rotation follows velocity. But now, when it is attached, then this projectile movement doesn't have a velocity, but it still affects the rotation. So let's deactivate this projectile movement when it is not needed. Search for auto-activate here, save, compile, open event graph, and after setting a velocity, select the projectile movement right before setting a velocity and call activate. Well, I didn't test it yet, but I'm almost sure that it will fix our problem. Well, yes, everything is fine. So let's return our play rate for a montage to 1 and increase a speed of a dagger from 500 to 3000. Save, compile. Also select projectile movement. Now our dagger flies on a line, but it should be affected by gravity. So we select projectile movement, we have projectile gravity scale. Let's set it to not 1, maybe 0.5 and start it. So now we can throw a dagger. Okay. Maybe we should even increase the gravity scale to 0.7 and increase the speed to 4500. Well, now we have a logic to throw a knife. We have to define a collisions for it. So let's select projectile movement and maybe we can do it with sweep collision. Well, first select your static mesh. Set collision preset to no collision. And what do we have to do? We have to do a line trace. So we're gonna do it from a center for this dagger. Open event graph, and after movement have started, we're gonna check whether our knife should collide. So in event tick, add a branch. Here we're gonna get projectile movement and get is active. Only if projectile movement is active, we're gonna do a line trace. So if true, we're gonna do line trace by channel. Start location is current knife location. Get actor location. And location is gonna be get actor rotation forward vector. multiplied by a length of a line trace from a middle of a knife. Let it be 50. Then we're gonna add this value to actor location. And this is gonna be an end of a line trace. Trace channel can be visibility, or you can change it to fit your needs. Let's draw for one frame and see how it will look like. Okay, looks like trace is done correctly. Now we're gonna check. Let's add the branch right after line trace and check if it was a hit. Then if it was a hit, then we should get projectile movement and deactivate it. Compile, save. Well, looks like 50 is too much, or oh, okay, that's collision of my wall. Well, a lucky mannequin, or it, well, no, it blocks visibility. So let's add some cube. Let's add some cube with a precise collision. Shape, cube, here it is. And let's throw some knives into it. Well, 50 is too much for this throwing knife, so I'm gonna decrease this value from 50 to maybe 20. Disable drawing. So here are our knives. Now we can throw them. They are flying, and one of them just stuck in a wall. That's all for these videos. I hope they help someone. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in comments. Thanks for watching. Also, I would like to mention that these are only a basics about logic of throwing a knife, and it should be extended to fit your needs, whether you want to aim into where your character looking at, or whether it should aim to where your camera looking at, and maybe you want to add some deviation between locations where your knife is flying, add some VFX. That's all on your side, and I hope these basics of creating an animation and throwing knife movement will help you.